All right, so it is 1:01. Want to be aware of everybody's time, but we'll go ahead and get started, and we will record this session and we will post it to the PD archives. We will also post the PowerPoint on the Title II website underneath the PD archives as well. So please don't feel like you have to take copious amounts of notes during this session. We will allow for time at the end for questions. So if you think of something as we go, feel free to pop it in the chat and we'll look at those at the end. But we'll go ahead and get started. So for those of you who I've not spoken with before, I'm Jessica Rieger. I'm the Director of Federal Program Performance and Accountability here at the System Office. So I do the program performance for College and Career Readiness and also Perkins. But today we're going to focus on a College and Career Readiness piece that we need to implement. And so we are going to look at how to accurately identify, document, and report student barriers to employment. Some of these slides are a little bit text heavy, but I wanted to make sure that once we ended the session, if you go back and pull up the PowerPoint, you have enough detail and notes to kind of follow along. Because we will talk about some ways that you could do data checks between Power BI and ADVANSYS for this topic today. So hopefully we'll have a deeper understanding of our barriers to employment categories that are recognized under WIOA. And we have a new form that we'll talk about too that will hopefully help you as you meet with students and collect this data to better collect it and then place into ADVANSYS. So in March of 2025, so not too long ago, the state completed its Octave monitoring visit. We had not had one since I think it was around 2018 that we had our last one. So they did a comprehensive review of the state team and our processes and our different processes, and then they also did a comprehensive look at our data reporting, collection, that kind of thing. So one of their recommendations, so it wasn't a finding, it was a recommendation, but oftentimes with compliance pieces, recommendations can turn into corrective actions later on. So we wanted to be sure to address this sooner rather than later. One of the things that they found was that we have some inconsistencies in our data reporting, specifically our low-income individuals, our ex-offenders, and then a couple other categories. So the ones that are highlighted in red are ones that are below the national average. The only category that we had where we were above the national average was in the category of individuals with disabilities. We were about 8.5% higher than the national average, but for the red areas especially, we were significantly below, and then that data doesn't necessarily align with some of the other data that we report, which this will make a lot more sense here in a second. So, for example, 23% of our participants, and this is based on program year 23-24, so July 1 of 23 through June 30th of 24. These were the data inconsistencies that they noted. So 23% reported that they were low income, yet 53% of our participants for that program year stated that they were unemployed or not in the labor force. And our reporting was about 6% lower than national average. Same thing with long-term unemployment. Only about 7.5% reported that they were in long-term unemployment, yet 53% of our participants for that program year reported that they were unemployed or not in the labor force. And then the other area, and I think this area is more just due to a confusion in when and when not to code someone. But with ex-offenders, we were 5% below national average, and they represented about 2.5% of the North Carolina population. But 36% of our participants noted that they were in corrections. So with that, I've given you the Pearl definition. So at minimum, however many folks we report to be in a correctional setting, you should have at least that many people that are also coded as ex-offender, because it should be someone who has been subject to any stage of the criminal justice process for committing a status offense or delinquent act. So even though someone is currently incarcerated, they still get that ex-offender tag on their data in ADVANSYS for our federal reporting. So they recommended that we reach out to the state of South Carolina, who does a really good job of collecting and reporting barriers to employment. So we did, and they sent us a copy of their form that they use in addition to their LEIS pages. And so we took that and then we kind of tweaked it and changed it, not only to align with how the data goes into ADVANSYS, but also to ensure that it kind of asks the questions in a very North Carolina specific way. Some of their things had naming conventions for places within South Carolina that wouldn't work for us. So this barriers to employment assessment, we did ensure that it is one page. It is currently available on the Title II website now. It is in the same space where we keep the LEIS forms. So it is available to download today. We will also put that with this training session, so you have it in that place as well. But either site, they're going to be the same data. But this form, we're going to ask that you fill it out in July on continuing students, so that we make sure we have up-to-date data in the system. You'll then key it to ADVANSYS, but this makes the questions a little bit easier to understand, not only for faculty and staff, but also for the students that we serve. So then in parentheses, and we've tried to italicize it so you can see that it's apart from the question, but it pertains to the section of the LEIS form that needs to be checked. So for example, it says, I've been dependent on someone else's income and now I need a job. So that would be your low income. And then we've also got different questions like that may not dawn on the student, that where it just says cultural barrier. There's specific questions that would allow someone to kind of think broader on that question. So I don't feel part of American culture or society, or my beliefs, religion, or personal lifestyle are keeping me from getting a job. Either one of those responses would get you a check mark on the cultural barrier. Again, all of the data that we collect for employment barriers, though, is student self-reported. We do not verify. For example, if someone says I receive Social Security insurance benefits for myself or my children, we do not then ask for proof of that. It is all still student self-reported, but our hope is that this will allow for more responses on those questions on the LEIS form, because right now we get really good data off of probably the first page, and then as the pages go on, it gets a little more sparse. This is the second part of that form. Again, it is one page, but so that you can see it on the PowerPoint, broke it into two snippets. But then we ask employment history, background, different examples of what would qualify for dislocated worker, low income, long-term unemployment, and then single parent, because we know a lot of times we don't have a lot of data on our single parents that accurately reflects the makeup of our current students that we serve in CCR. So, your LEIS forms, there's no change there. They are still to only be completed upon the initial intake of a student, or if a student stops out, so their POP closes, they've been out 90 or more days, and they return back to your program for a second POP, or a third POP, or a fourth POP. So if there is a gap in services where the POP closes and then they return for a new POP, new LEIS forms need to be completed. So this barriers to employment form, we would like it to be filled out upon intake. And then if a student returns for a new POP, just like the LEIS forms, but in addition, the difference here is that we also would like to have these data collected each July. It'll be part of the end of year closeout memo that I send out. There'll be a reminder letting you know to please have any continuous students fill this out for the new program year. And then this completed form will be housed in the CCR students master file. That's where you keep your LEIS forms, your NRS assessments, any of your AHS or MPHSE information. So that barriers to employment form will go into that student's master file. So if you are a community college, it's not going into that class closeout file that you do for FTE compliance. It is going into the file where you're keeping your federal student compliance with LEIS forms, NRS assessments. This form will go in there. And I did put a link in here if you need the most recent record retention policies. There's a link there to the North Carolina Department of Archives so that you can quickly get there and have the most recent version of their manual, because they're the ones that publish for the colleges and for the student records how long each thing needs to be kept. So, one way with which you can check if you are currently doing a good job with collecting this, and some people are, but some people, you'll notice when you do this process that there's a gap in the data. So if you go to Power BI, both of these documents are going to come out of Power BI. We recommend that you do this each month, that we do a new publication of Power BI. We will publish period 1 for the new program year before the end of this week. However, if you wanted to look at this today, you could pull your final 24-25 data. And then you're going to look at the employment barrier tab. So on the left-hand side, when you're in Power BI, you'll see a tab that says employment barriers. Click that. This is the report that's going to pull up. So you can either open a new screen, or you can snippet this and copy and paste it onto a Word document, or just expand the snippet that you did. But then the other document that you want to pull is your NRS Table 6, also in Power BI. It's under your NRS tables, but pull NRS Table 6. And you want to compare these two documents. And what you're looking for is a couple of things. So on your employment barriers form, you should have 100% of your participants showing as one of these areas. So to show eligibility for CCR enrollment, your students need to either be an English language learner, low literacy, basic skills deficient, and or cultural barrier. Students can have multiples of these, but they do need to have at least one. So your total here should always be 100%. Then the other place that you want to look is, this is your table 6 right here, your institutional programs. It's going to give you a total of students that you reported to be in community corrections, the total that you reported to be in a correctional facility, and then the total that you have reported to be in another institutional setting. If all 3 of these have numbers in them, total up the number that are showing that they are in an institutional program, compare that to your employment barriers section that says ex-offender program year status. So those should equal, if not exceed, each other. So however many people you have listed to be in one of these institutional programs should match your ex-offenders in the program year. Now, depending on how you're coding other institutional setting, it may or may not be a correctional type facility. If it's not, exclude these students. But definitely 100%, if you have coded someone to be in community corrections or a correctional facility, add those two numbers together, and that should equal, but more than likely exceed, the number of ex-offenders that you currently have in the program here. The other place to look is on employment barriers. I'm sorry, on table 6, you will see your participant status on entry. This is going to tell you how many people are unemployed or not in the labor force. Compare that information to your employment barriers page under the sections of long-term unemployed and low income status. If there is a significant gap in those two areas, then you're probably underreporting those who are actually long-term unemployed or those that are low income. Not everybody who is unemployed or not in the labor force is going to fall into one of these categories. We totally understand that. However, probably many of them do. So we just want to make sure that we are collecting accurate and more reliable data and then reporting it for the state. So let me back up on there. So the reasoning behind this is not to give you more things that you have to do. It really has to do with there are a lot of potential forthcoming changes, not only to potentially how the state of North Carolina's adult ed is funded. Currently, our adult ed allocations are made based on the number of immigrants that the state has and the number of people who do not have a high school diploma. That could very likely change. We are not 100% sure yet what that change will be, but it is possible, if not probable, that it could change. So in an effort to prior plan, we definitely are trying to make sure that we are accurately reflecting the students of North Carolina through our data. So a couple other reminders. Please remember to run your NRS separation reports out of ADVANSYS weekly. Also make sure that you run your missing entering EFL reports in ADVANSYS weekly. Some of you, if you're smaller, you can do it bi-weekly, but please get into a routine of running those two reports, especially the separation report. We know that now is the time that a lot of folks are finalizing or getting ready to finalize their ICR reports for the colleges. That means that there are a tremendous amount of ServiceNow tickets coming in with, can you add this student back? Can you unlock the student? Can you unapprove attendance? So doing that, oftentimes you've got to go back and manually separate the student once you've made your corrections, because more than 106 days has passed since the student was last active. And so the system is very sensitive for the auto separation. So when you run that NRS separation report, if you are showing students with more than 106 days of inactivity, you must manually separate them. I run that report up here at the state weekly to try to keep tabs on it because it can get out of control really quick. And then it becomes overwhelming to try to start manually separating thousands of students. So the other thing with running the missing entering EFL report, your students are not going to be reported in Power BI if they don't have an entering EFL. So oftentimes we'll get tickets that say, hey, this student made an MSG. I don't understand why I'm not seeing them in Power BI. And then when we dig into the data, they do not have either a provisional EFL, an alternate placement, or an NRS score in the 270-day look back that we can use as their initial placement. for the current program year. And so those students are not, we can't put them on any of the tables because we place students not by their name or any of their PII. We place them based on their NRS levels upon entry into the program year. So please, please, please run that missing entering EFL report. And then also my third thing is please, please, please make any former employees inactive in advances. So if someone is getting ready to retire, if someone is not going to teach for you in the next semester, if you unfortunately had to let somebody go, or if someone has transferred to a different area of your institution, please remember to go in and deactivate their advances accounts. It is super easy. You just find them in your user list and then check at the very bottom, account is inactive. And that's all you have to do. But we also want to make that user list per provider is what the state uses to show how many faculty and staff the state of North Carolina has on the state table 7. So we don't want to look like we are using all of our money to pay all of these teachers who were actually not currently employed in this program. So, and it's not like colleague you had to wait until the next program year to deactivate them. You do not have to do that with advances. The day that someone is no longer working for you, you can go ahead and make them inactive. You do not have to wait until the next program year. All right, next thing. These are the post-exit indicators. These are something that historically I've not spent a lot of time on because they're follow-up outcomes. This is data based on students who exit in a program year. So for example, our 25-26 post-exit indicators, these are our goals for each of these measures. So we need to have about 42% of folks employed second and fourth quarter after exit, but we are tabulating this data based on people who exited in the 24-25 program year. So that means if you are a student in the 24-25 program year, 6 months after that program year ends, so end of December, we're going to check to see if that individual was employed. And if they're employed, what their median earnings are at the time. And then at the end of the 25-26 program year, we go back and look and see. So like in June of next year, we're going to check to see how many folks in the 24-25 program year are employed in that fourth quarter after exit. We also look at their credential attainment rate. And then we also look at measurable skills gains. Measurable skills gains are the only thing that we measure in the current program year. So the measurable skills gain target of 44% is based on students who are enrolled for the 25-26 program year. The other 4 measures are based on students who exited, they attended and then exited during the 24-25 program year. So the program year that just ended a couple months ago. So it gets confusing. I have to have charts in my office that kind of talk about the different exit quarters and when we're matching and that kind of thing. But these are now going to be extremely important because the state of North Carolina, effective July 17th of this year when we received a memo, and this was something that was talked about when WIOA first came out, but we'd not been held to any kind of sanction if we didn't meet the measure. We will now be held to sanctions if we do not meet measures. So for Title II, there are 4 titles of WIOA. We are Title II. For Title II WIOA, for the reporting year that we are getting ready to report by October 1st of this year. So it's our reporting for the 24-25 program year, which is based on people who exited in 23-24, and then the MSG for 24-25. That is what that data will be based on. We are being held to meeting the target that we had, which was 41% employment second quarter after exit, and then we are being held to an MSG of 43.6%. We have well exceeded the MSG of 43.6%. We ended up with 50.2%, which is amazing. It is fantastic. And we are so, so proud of the work that each and every one of you do with the students of North Carolina each and every day. We know that that was not easy to obtain. Employment second quarter after exit is the one that has us a little nervous because North Carolina is what they call a data match state. And so we take the social security numbers of our participants and we send it to the North Carolina Department of Commerce. And they match it against the state's wage earning files. So they then send back to us, hey, of all these SSNs that you sent, this many were employed second quarter, this many were employed fourth quarter, and this is what the median earning was for those students that you sent to us. The thing is, for every student that we did not have an SSN on, because right now we are only a data match state, we rely solely on that data match with Commerce. Our denominator is very, very large because they can't data match if there's no SSN. So those students are already in the denominator. They're not gonna be able to have a hit on their employment or the median earnings. So our outcomes for employment and median earnings is never quite reflective. It's really not reflective at all of our students in North Carolina, just because there are so many now that we don't have an SSN to data match with. So this is a two-part ask. One, we do need you to make every effort to collect SSNs. I've had a couple of providers say, well, we get the last four of their social. We understand that a lot of folks don't want to give out their social. They're worried about like privacy, data security, that kind of thing. However, we do want you to make every effort to please collect the SSNs of students. It is the only way that we can data match for these post-exit outcomes. And the importance of these post-exit outcomes is that we're already caught off guard with having to report this program year on people who exited in 23-24. And we have to come within 50% of that target or we will receive technical assistance. If in the second year, which is already closed, because 24-25 that we're going to measure is already closed. If we don't come within that measure, then that's a 10% sanction to the state. That is why this is so important. It's not us sitting up here saying, what can we ask folks to do? These are the things that are important because we want you to have all the money that you can possibly have to run your programs because we do great work in adult ed in North Carolina. So we want our data to reflect the great work that we do. And that's the mismatch here is that right now it is not, in my opinion, reflecting the great work that we do to not only help students achieve their CCR goals when they enter our programs, but we all know we help people transition into employment and post-secondary way more than our data shows. So please, please, please try to get a student's social security number. It should only go at the top of that LEIS form. You should only be collecting the LEIS form when the student initially comes into your program, and then if they leave for a period of more than 90 days and later return for a new POP. If you are a program that is still using those LEIS forms to register students for classes, do not do that. That is not the workflow that we want you to have, nor should you have. That way you're only collecting that SSN on that initial intake. If you're only collecting the last four, that's not helpful. There's nowhere to put the last four of a social, so don't do that either. The impact though is significant on our performance and funding. So we do know though that oftentimes we will have students who for many reasons may not have an SSN. And that is okay. we still want to have a more accurate picture of our employment and post-secondary success of students. So the state has decided to very quickly implement not only the data match, but also surveys. We will begin doing follow-up surveys with students that we are unable to data match starting January 2026. We will hold a training session in January of 26. We're going to have providers work on collecting the data on employment second and fourth quarter after exit and median earnings. And the call list and outcomes will be reported through ADVANSYS. And so this is going to be applicable to any of your students who are federally employed, are in the military, are self-employed, or do not have an SSN. So because we data match with North Carolina Commerce, they don't have access to federal wage reports. We don't have a way to data match with the military directly or with federal employment records directly. And then also, if folks are self-employed, oftentimes their information is not going to come through those unemployment wage reports. So those will be the students that we are going to do the survey method with to better collect and accurately reflect the outcomes of our students in North Carolina. So I know this is a lot, but are there any questions at this time? We have plenty of time for questions. So I am not the best at Zoom. So let me go over here to this chat. Right, we'll stop sharing. I'll move y'all over here. All right. Here we go. Is there a report to determine who doesn't have a SSN? Okay, so in ADVANSYS on the dashboard, it'll show you your percent that have SSN. So you can click on those students. And it may be easier if we generate something out of Power, but if you click on that section, and then export it to Excel, it may give you what. But I will look into that more and make sure. Oh, good. Eric already replied. Thanks, Eric. So the NRS registration report in ADVANSYS also shows which students have an SSN on file. What does the $5,100 represent on the median earnings? That is a great question too. So initially I had thought that this meant that you need to gross $5,100 a month the second quarter, so 6 months after you leave our program. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, I was like, Arvin, we may be working in the wrong area. So no, what that means is it is across the second quarter. So it's a total of a 3-month gross earnings amount. So over the course of 3 months, the target is that they should have 5,100 in gross earnings over that 3-month period. So it's not per month. Rebecca said, when students self-disclose, I always report the personal info they provide, but I assume there would be some kind of restriction privacy issue if we directly ask them about their previous criminal history, addiction issues, and other personal info. So we don't want you to interrogate folks. The idea behind the one pager is that we have written out the questions in a hopefully easier to understand format. You know, you do have the data dictionary that is available with the LEIS forms that gives you a really good descriptor of what each of the pieces on the LEIS form is asking. But we tried to write these questions in a more student user-friendly manner so that the idea is you're in orientation or it's day 1 of the new class. You just hand it out, they put their name, their date, the date, and we don't need a yes, a no. They simply just put a check mark in any box that applies to them. So it doesn't need to be an interrogation or are you sure you're not an ex-offender? Now, what we always did when I was at the local level is that if I had a class at the prison or at the jail, when those forms come back and that registration form comes back, because I have to code the class as P for prison and colleague, and then I also needed to ensure that all of those students were being marked as in a correctional facility, that would be the time that you can go ahead and check off ex-offender. Because if you're at a jail or prison, you need to have the ex-offender. Like, that's never going to be a thing where you're in prison, but you're not an ex-offender. And the same thing goes with the jail. So I know that, yes, you are innocent until proven guilty. Under the parole definition, though, you are currently having an issue with the legal system, which could possibly pose as an employment barrier. It's not a judgment it's simply what are things that would make it harder for this individual to gain employment. That is all we're looking at. We're not trying to say, oh my gosh, like you need to do better. That is not the point at all. It is simply what are things that are making it even more difficult for this individual to obtain a good, a job that has a life-sustaining wage. Where did you say the new barriers to employment assessment form is located? It is on the Title II site, and I will put that link in here. We put it with the LEIS form. Okay, so here is the link to there. It's on the lower right-hand side underneath the LEIS form. And then we also gave you the barriers to employment definitions too, for faculty and staff. If you can, Jasmine said our ITIN number is acceptable for data match. If you are able to obtain ITIN numbers, a couple weeks ago, I did send out the job aid for how to enter those into ADVANSYS. You click on, when you're entering the student in, you just click student does not have an SSN. A new field comes up with an X number. You simply wipe out the X number and put in the ITIN and save. So we do want you to get those numbers. And we are attempting to work out a way in which to send a second file for data matching. So that's why we're wanting you to collect those now. So it's not a guarantee, but yes, please collect those. Could you describe the sanctions related to not meeting post-exit indicators again? I heard something about 10%, but wasn't sure. So the state as a whole, it's on the Octave website. It came out July 17th. It really caught us by surprise. It talks about it in the actual WIOA legislation, about being held to 6 post-exit indicators, and the 6th one is the one where it says effectiveness in serving employers or customers. Arvin, you remember, is it employers or customers? There's one where it's like, it seems very subjective.
Employers.
So that one for a couple of years, they kind of went back and forth, like, how do we measure this? But each of the 4 titles negotiates their post-exit indicator percentages with the federal government. And then we report that data at the end of the program year. And up until July 17th, they hadn't held any of us to the sanctions. But the sanctions have been there as a possibility since WIOA was enacted. But now it better clarifies that the first time that you're not within range, then you get technical assistance. The second year that you're not in compliance is a 10% sanction to the governor's discretionary budget. So that's not good. So we would like to keep all the money possible because we know we do have the data. I mean, we know that we are much more effective than our data reflects, honestly. Let's see, are the new barriers to employment questions going to be part of the LEIS form? So the barriers to employment questions, are just expansions of what is already on the LEIS form. So the barriers to employment form is just a better way to ask the questions to the student, especially if you want to just give the form to the student. But all of this information is already a part of the LEIS form. It's just that we can tell from the data, and Octave can tell from our data, that students are not fully understanding what it's asking based on the responses to other pieces. When we are gathering student data after they exit, does that mean after they complete the CCR program? Yes. So second quarter after exit means 6 months after they left CCR. Fourth quarter after exit does mean a year after they left CCR. Did you mention we will have to have current students fill out this form now, or just for new students moving forward when the LEIS form is filled out? So I've shown you how to do a comparative of your final data for last program year, but starting today, it would probably more than likely be extremely beneficial, with the exception of just a few providers, that all of your continuing students fill this form out. And even for those that have really good matches between employment barriers and their table 6, a lot of you guys have students who have been with you for multiple program years. So if there is a change in the way that the state is allocated money for adult ed, especially if that was to then be in partnership with the Department of Ed and the Department of Labor, and if you've been watching the news, you can kind of see where this idea is going. We need to have the best data that is most reflective of our students right now. So it would be in everyone's best interest to hand this form out to all of your continuing students, make sure that data matches what is in ADVANSYS now. Because even if you have continuing students, situations change. Now would be the time to update the data in the system. Our biggest concern, though, is, are we missing pieces of data that we should be reporting? So the short answer is yes, please start using this with the LEIS forms, and please give this out today or tomorrow or in the near future to any of your continuing students. ITI numbers are for undocumented immigrants. I no longer trust the safety and confidentiality of this information in any database anywhere. So ITIN numbers are not just for undocumented immigrants. If anyone has a small business, you get an ITIN number. So for example, I have an ITIN number because I do community festivals and have a small business doing bath bombs through Etsy and eBay that I've had since 2015. I don't like to use my social security number. I'm not big enough to be a corporation, but to be able to put it on taxes, I have a tax ID number. So if you just don't, I would let a student decide if they want to report that number or not. I would not make that decision for all of your students, whether that's an SSN or an ITIN. If you have a student who doesn't want to give it to you for whatever reason, we're not saying that you can't serve them, but you will be doing surveys on anybody that we cannot data match. Please share the link for the form again. My system went out. Marvelo, can you scroll up in the chat? I'm going to copy and paste it. Oh, thanks, Steve. All right. So, and again, the focus of today's session is not the surveys. We will do a training on that. I am trying to make it as easy as possible for everyone. We are going to hopefully be able to generate a report from ADVANSYS that will give you every student. You're not going to, I promise you, you're not going to have to like figure out who exited during these quarter time frames. We're going to give you all that information. And then we will explain how you do the follow-up, and we're going to have you put that information directly into ADVANSYS, so that you're not having to do any other kind of report or anything like that. But if we don't do the surveys on top of the data match, then we're just not gonna have it already. So we have got to better reflect these post-exit indicators. So that's the bottom line. And it just kind of is what it is, and we have to meet the challenge. Our alternate IDs using 3-digit college code plus colleague sufficient? Is there no SSA? Yeah, so Hannah, what happens in ADVANSYS is that if you click that the student does not have an SSN, it goes to that other screen where it gives you a long X number. If you don't override anything there and you just click save, if you go to colleague, once that student's integrated and look at the DADD screen, you will see that integration gave that student the 3-digit college code plus the last 5 of their colleague already. So if you're making that change on the ADVANSYS side, you don't have to. Integration takes care of that for you, even though it looks like there's just an X number. Integration's programmed to know which college this student's going to, and as soon as that colleague number is generated, it tells the system to put that 3-digit code in the last 5 of the colleague number on DADD as the ASID. Arvady, do you want to add anything?
I don't have anything in particular to add, but just I would like if you could give them overall information regarding, I just want to go back to corrections education, just making sure that students are coded correctly. Do you have that data just to share with them to do a comparison regarding the number of students that we're serving versus the data that we have in ADVANSYS?
Are you talking about like statewide?
Yes.
For this last reporting year?
Yes.
You know. All right. So statewide for the 24-25 program year, we have 1,864 coded as X. I'll put that in the chat. So then, if I go to the statewide table 6, $10,925 students are coded as being in a community correction or correctional facility. So there, we've got a big gap for the 24-25 program year in the data as well. So I think a lot of it though is just having this training and going back and making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. So the other thing, statewide, we've got 72,613 participants and reportables that are either unemployed or not in the labor force. And then if I look at long-term unemployment, that's 4,222 students. So, and a lot of it probably is, it's just not very clear on the LEIS form. Can you post the link? Let me see if I can copy and paste it out of here. To the records of the teacher. There you go. All right. Other questions, comments, concerns? Karen Neal, I love your graphic for your Zoom. Is that y'all's school mascot? Is it a bear? A trailblazer bear. I love it. I may have missed this, but are the questions on the LEIS form going to change to the new barriers questions? No, the LEIS form will remain the same. The barriers to employment form is just a supplement to ensure that the questions are asked in a manner that hopefully is more easy to understand for students to better capture that data, as opposed to our LEIS form that may just say low literacy or dislocated worker, or it's just trying to be a better expansion of the question or of the data that's collected on the LEIS. All right. Well, we still have a couple of minutes. Let's see. If a student understands the question but still chooses to answer something not accurate. So all of the data that we collect in Title II is student self-reported. We do not ask you to verify any of the data. And if a student says no or doesn't want to answer it, that's fine. It is all student self-reported, but if we come to monitor and none of your students have answered anything on the forms, that's not gonna be great. But if you have a student who's just like, I don't want to disclose any information. I mean, there's some stuff you're gonna have to put something down for, but but no, you can't make them answer anything, and we're not verifying anything, so it is still just student self-reported. But we want everybody to make the best possible attempt that they can at collecting accurate data that reflects our students, because if none of us really put any effort behind this, it could be catastrophic for our state. And I kind of like what I do. Does the newer form introduce this program year affect the post-exit outcomes? Does the new, I'm not understanding what you're asking, Jeff. If you want to unmute and ask, you can too, if that's easier.
Okay, I'm sorry. This year when we downloaded the LEIS form, there was a third sheet, or I guess a fifth sheet, that asked them additional questions. Is this part of that outcomes that we're talking about?
That is to better connect us with the other titles of WIOA, because we know that there's 4 titles of WIOA, and we know that oftentimes we share clients or students. Each title calls them something different, but we share individuals across the titles, and so capturing that data helps the statewide data, because there's not, like, Title II does its reporting, but then the state of North Carolina across all 4 titles, we have to have a statewide WIOA plan for all 4 titles together, and then there is outcomes reported on that macro level as well. So that helps us link people that are being served in multiple titles better to that reporting. But that 5th page doesn't help with our post-exit indicators, unfortunately. Not directly. All right, so it's 1:57. If you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat in these final couple of minutes. But again, we will post the recording as well as the PowerPoint in the PD archives for you to pull and review later, or if you need to share it with someone that was unable to attend today, you can. But we appreciate everybody's time, and hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. In central North Carolina here, it's apparently fake fall, so hopefully it has cooled down a little in your area as well. But we appreciate your time, and thank you all for joining. Have a great day.